an interesting thing about football in the UK. I don't actually know. I don't know much about sports. Certainly not in North America, but it might be the same that people support teams that are not where they're from. I sort of grow up in Oxford, and my friends are supporting Chelsea FC, and they're supporting Arsenal, and they're supporting Leeds, and I've always been a bit confused by this. I mean, I assume it's probably got something to do with people moving cities. I mean, there must be some origin for this, but it seems mostly it's inherited from parents. But some people get into football for the first time in their generation. They're the first generation of their family, and it seems like they almost just would have to arbitrarily pick somewhere if they don't pick their own city, that is. And then I see these stadia of people screaming at each other. It's like one of the loudest environments imaginable produced by human beings, because there's a team in front of them that represents a city that most of the players probably aren't from, most of the supporters probably aren't from, but this idea of this team has come to represent something in which all of your masculinity can be thrown behind. Men pitted against men in a battle. Someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, and it feels like it's a good outlet for an expression of the kind of thing that we're talking about, which might be why it's a sort of masculine dominated sport. But it does seem just quite interesting to me that, I mean, I've always wondered about this question. I thought to myself, okay, suppose your football team it's kind of a ship of Theseus that you can do with football, in that players move around, right? And so if a player moves from your team to an opposing team, you might still respect the player, but you don't support that player anymore. You support the new player who's come in to replace him. Well, what if your favorite team are playing your enemies, and half time comes, and due to some freak business deal in half time, every single player on one team is swapped for every single player on the other team. And so everybody comes back on the pitch, and they're actually stood on the same side of the pitch because, they've swapped, but now they're stood on the other side. The only difference is that they've changed which t-shirts they're wearing, and they go to play football. Who are you cheering for? Do you just suddenly cheer against the very people that you were just cheering for because they're wearing a different t-shirt? The whole thing sort of bemuses me. I don't know if you're into sports and if you can relate to this kind of thing.
I mean, yeah, firstly, I cheered for the Toronto Raptors when I was a kid, and it was out of the arbitrary, no one in my family liked basketball, but it was out of the arbitrary fact that I really liked dinosaurs. And so it was a cool mascot. And then they were the only Canadian team. So I always cheered for them. So yeah, it's usually just out of some random, whatever. But that's also a very interesting point in terms of, a lot of psychology studies are used to this. They use this paradigm of just randomly assorting people into red shirts and blue shirts, and then they do all these tasks, and you can kind of see quickly the kind of in-group, out-group dynamics. It's how they study a lot of out-group psychological phenomena. And I've never thought of the idea of how it would relate to spectators. I don't know. I'm thinking that in terms of if I really identified with the personalities of the team, it usually takes me there is in sports, it usually takes a little while if a player was playing on my team and you develop some sort of I guess affection towards them or loyalty, that when they go on to another team, you're still going to cheer for them for a little bit. Even if they're playing against your team, you're not going to feel that bad because they are beating your team, because you're like, well, they kind of used to. It kind of takes a little bit of time on an emotional level. So I don't know if in halftime it would be enough for players to, or for fans to really switch in terms of loyalty based off of just a shirt. But I do also think that maybe the whole point of sports is I don't know if you've ever seen the show Community, but there's a good little bit where the character Jeff, he has a pencil and he holds up the pencil to the group and he goes, "This pencil's name is Blinky," and gives a bunch of facts about Blinky. He's like, Blinky really likes to likes when people use him to draw nature, and he's really likes using his eraser and stuff like that. And then he just snaps, and everybody goes like, "Aw," and then he snaps the pencil. He goes, "Blinky's dead," and then they all went, "Aw," and he's explaining that a lot of everything we do is in some way, especially when it comes to sports, is we need to find things to give meaning and relevance to, and when we kind of identify ourselves or identify it with like a sort of some level of emotional resonance, then it's already gone. Like we've it doesn't really matter in terms of trying to grasp it on like an empirical level. We just seem to like to do that in general, and I think sports is like a good example of that.
Well, we can talk a bit more about the philosophy of sports here. What is it that's being supported by a supporter? There are sort of a few options that you might consider. By the way, I think that the, so to speak, objectively correct answer to the question is that you continue to support the team. That is, you support the other players, because I imagine it would be confusing, but if you were to interview people outside of the stadium, they'd probably say something like, well, this is obviously very weird and I feel very conflicted, but my team is my team and that's who I'm here to support. Okay, so what is the team? What's being supported? Like, you might say something like, if all the players switch out, the only thing that's left is maybe the owner or the manager. It feels weird to say that you're like supporting the manager, or certainly supporting the owner. And, owners can change. So the players change, the manager changes, the team colors might change, the uniform changes, the owner changes, the team changes hands. And yet still there are people who will be there saying, but, Tottenham, Arsenal, yeah, that's my team, that's what I support. What is it that's being supported? It's not the place, because most of the players aren't from the place. And the supporters aren't from the place. It's not the players, because they can switch out. It's not the owners or the managers, they can be switched out. What is it that's represented by this, the logo for Arsenal FC? What is that thing?
Yeah, I think sports teams are almost the quintessential kind of presentation of essentialism. Like you believe that there's some sort of essence about this team in some way, that there's this idea about it that can't be touched by any sort of external influence. And that I remember when the pandemic happened and how important it was for sports to come back. And it makes sense because it grounds people. It has that essentialism to it, that no matter which players are traded, or even sometimes they change the cities of the team, sometimes the name of the team changes, and sometimes the team is doing absolutely terrible and people are still cheering for it. None of those things matter. It's that it grounds us in some way, that there's some sort of truth to it that we assign to it, and thereby identifying with it, we can stabilize aspects of ourselves. No matter if you're going through a divorce or you're getting fired, you are a fan of Chelsea, or you're a fan of FC Barcelona. Like that's going to be a consistent trait of yours. And it sounds absurd and ridiculous if you're not a sports fan, but I think it explains the sort of at times primal associations that people have with it.
But that it can be a consistent part of your personality that you are a Chelsea supporter, but what is that? What is Chelsea? What is Chelsea FC? I guess I'm just struggling to understand, even like as an idea, like obviously it's not a material object, but even like in the abstract realm, I just don't see what it is that the concept is attaching itself to. You know what I mean?
I think it goes back to the pencil idea. Or the pencil example. It's less about what actually it is. There's nothing there. And I mean that in terms of the idea. Like the idea itself can be completely empty. It's the effect of the idea. It's and I think I was recently reading this book called Cruel Optimism, and it's about in general this psychological phenomena where people will gravitate towards certain objects of desire or salvation or hope, and those very things will actually be impediments or the downfall to their flourishing. I think this author specifically is talking about the idea of the good life in post-war US, kind of like the sort of consumerism and general kind of up and up progress going on. And, that led to a lot of environmental degradation, a lot of mental health issues, greater material progress. But there was never actually a clear idea of like where it was going or what it was going to amount to. I think there is no idea behind these things. I think these things are empty. It's a completely empty container. But what's important is that there is a container, and we can like grasp it, and it grounds us in some way. But I think at the end of the day, when you deconstruct these things, there's nothing to them. It matters very little if the Toronto Raptors end up ever winning another title or not in the grand scheme of things. And at the same time, it would hurt me a lot if that was the truth. So,
I'm just thinking about it now. I think there's an obvious option which I completely neglected to consider, which is that the football club consists not in its players, not in its managers, but in its supporters. It's the supporters themselves who make up the thing that they're supporting. And I think that's something like what you're saying too, about you're just sort of creating out of thin air this relationship to thousands of other people. And that's what it is, because even if the team changed, it doesn't actually matter which side everybody starts clapping, as long as everybody's doing it, right? And, supporters can have problems with their players. They can start to hate one of their players. They can hate the new owner. They can think the manager is a bad decision, but very rarely are they sort of turning against each other. And in fact, most of their anger is not directed at the opposing players, but the opposing supporters as well. So I don't know, maybe everything else is just a proxy for, something like something resembling a national identity or a community identity, but this microcosm of it within a stadium.
Yeah, no, like I made a video a while ago called "The Case Against Santa Denialism," and it was like a video about people that are, they deny Santa in some way. And all of it was kind of just to say at the end, and it was a bit of like I'm atheistic or agnostic, but I fully understand why people are religious. I understand that, like, the whole point of faith or hope. I find that it's an extremely interesting thing to talk about. But the video ends on this kind of interview from Donald Glover, and he's talking about, the spirit of Christmas isn't like, it isn't Santa, or it isn't like the gifts necessarily. It's in like the belief of the kids. Like, that's like growing up is when you realize like why you should lie to your kids about Santa, pretty much. That's the whole point, is like, that's the most magical part of it, is because by them believing, by them kind of endorsing this magic, you kind of enter into that space. Even if you're like logically aware of it, it's like, it gives a little bit of something special to your life. There's a sort of goodness to your life that I think is, on an affective level, crucial for us to keep going, like as a society in some way. Like we do need to hold on to these like strange objects of ritual and hope.
If you liked that clip, then you'll love the full conversation, which you can watch right now by clicking just here. Go on.